Well, thank you so much to everyone who's joined us for today's very exciting program, which is called Political Perspectives in 2020 with Neil Levesque, who is with the Institute for Politics at Saint Anselm College. My name is Kathleen Toomey, and I am Vice President of Marketing for the Riverwoods Group. Let me get through, for some of you who may not have been on Zoom, let me give you a couple of housekeeping notes for today's conversation. Everyone here is on mute, but we welcome questions and that helps animate the discussion. So go to the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen and type in questions throughout the presentation. And when Neil is done, we will be taking your questions and answering as many of them as possible in the next hour. As I said, this is something fairly new for us since COVID to be on Zoom. So if you have any suggestions or recommendations of what other programs you'd like to see, let us know. Also, we are recording today. So if you really want to share this with someone, you will be getting a copy of this recording in your email as long as you're registered. And we have people from Manchester, Concord, Nashua, Bedford, Bristol, all over New Hampshire. We're really excited about the response to this idea. We contacted Neil a year ago to book him. So we're very, very grateful. Thank you so much, Neil, for joining us today. We did not realize how newsworthy this particular time would be, but we're going to have a great discussion. Let me tell you a little bit about Neil, who is just a delightful person. He's the executive director, as I mentioned, of the nationally recognized New Hampshire Institute of Politics for St. Anselm's. In normal times, you would see debates happening at the Institute for Politics. A lot of news media base themselves there. But the Institute's mission is to increase civic engagement, and it's especially noted for its focus on presidential politics. Neil has worked in New Hampshire politics for over 30 years. He told me he started when he was 12. In addition, he served on numerous nonprofit boards, and he's currently the vice chair at Catholic Medical School and on the board of directors of the Peace Development Authority. We are very, very lucky to have Neil with us today. For those of you who don't know who the Riverwoods Group is, we are Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit continuing care retirement communities. And you may say, what is a continuing care retirement community? It is a place where you come when you are independent and at least 62 years or better. And you come into the community, meet lots of people, have a number of amenities. And as you age, you can receive care in a number of different places within the community. You can have assisted living, memory care, and nursing care. We were started by two very smart women in the Seacoast who started Riverwoods Exeter. Our first campus was opened in 1994, and we have 3 campuses in Exeter. We have a campus in Manchester called Birch Hill, which became a CCRC in 2009. And our newest campus, Riverwoods Durham, opened in November of last year. So that's where we are based. We are absolutely a New Hampshire born and bred organization that seeks to provide community, purpose, and peace of mind to a growing number of older adults. Just a quick introduction to continuing care retirement communities. For those of you who take a look at our communities, they look like beautiful over 55 apartments and cottages, but we are actually an insurance product. So our contracts are regulated by the state of New Hampshire Department of Insurance. We report our financial performance to the state, and importantly, the government considers that being in a CCRC means you are prepaying for your potential healthcare need for assisted living or skilled nursing or nursing care. So a portion of what you pay, your one-time entrance fee and your monthly fee, are tax deductible. So it's a smart financial decision, and it's a great way to ensure that you know you're going to get care when you need it. But it's also a lifestyle choice. It's for people who want to get more out of life, who are not ready to hang up their interests. They want to do less work at home and have more fun and meet more people. We have free fitness programs, activities, education, and we are extremely safe place to be during this current environment. We have all PPE, we've got healthcare centers right within our community, and we stay on top of daily updates from the CDC, from New Hampshire, so we are very COVID safe. And it gives you an opportunity to stay in control of the choices in your life. So if you are thinking that you would like a plan for today and the future, I encourage you to check out our communities in Manchester, Exeter, and Durham. So now, let's go to the topic at hand. We are going to be talking with Neil about political perspectives in New Hampshire. And Neil, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. Very happy to be here. I have spoken over at River Woods in Exeter in the past, and I was reminded today by our dean here at Saint Anselm College, Mark Cronin, that he has spoken there.
Yes.
His wife, Professor Cronin, has spoken there, and many faculty from Saint Anselm come over and it really provides, some speaking and some topics over at River Woods, and we'll hopefully continue to do that. It's an exciting place.
We have a great partnership with you. It's been wonderful working with Mark and the faculty at St. A's. I don't know anyone that is more dedicated to spreading knowledge among multiple age groups than St. Anselm's. It's been wonderful.
Yes, this little college on a hill here in New Hampshire, a lot of times, you can grow up in New Hampshire and live here, and you really don't get exposed to the fact that this is really an outstanding location for humanities and education for the state. And so we'll continue this partnership and continue to come over when we can. So here we are talking about political perspectives 2020. Now, I know that many of you are thinking, oh, is there some sort of an election going on? We had forgotten about that. Who wants to hear about politics? We hear about it all day long. This might be a little bit different. The New Hampshire Institute of Politics that I'm the director of, we're really sort of a referee for politics. We're the venue. We're the place where we want all sides to come in, because the argument in politics is good. And the argument in American politics is really necessary for our democracy to continue. So we offer this great location where we have all kinds of different things taking place. So it's not just presidential politics, which you'll hear a lot about. We hosted the big ABC presidential debate here in February. We did, I think, 12 town hall meetings with CNN and the presidential candidates here on campus. We do the big Granite State debates with WMUR TV here in the building. In fact, we're getting ready for those next week. So nonstop action. We also have two big auditoriums where we do things like Politics and Eggs, which is a signature series that we put on. Many of you might remember the show, The West Wing, which was very popular, I think, in the 90s. I tell my students, and they have no idea, of course, because they were born at that time. But,
the West Wing just did a HBO special, actually, a reunion.
A reunion.
Mm-hmm.
So in one episode, President Josiah Bartlett is asked, well, where is he going? He's going back to his home state of New Hampshire to go do Politics and Eggs, where they sign the wooden egg. And we've had all the candidates do that. It's very exciting here. We have a full television studio. So many times, especially in the pre-Zoom era, when you would see, your U.S. Senator or the governor of New Hampshire or any notable candidate going up on television, and there were these mill buildings. The Manchester mill buildings were behind them, all kind of lit up. Those are coming out of our studio. And then we would do about 3 or 4 hits a day going into the national media. And then we have, of course, our Saint Anselm students, 2,000 strong. And they really have a program here that they run this institute. We have the Arthur Young 2,800 volume presidential library. It is amazing. First editions primarily. Dr. Arthur Young, he writes books on libraries, and this was his personal collection that he donated to us. So we have that in the building as well, a full cafe, a lot of things going on here, a lot of political activity. And of course, we see the business side of politics. And some people say, well, what is that? And I say, well, you know, when people are majoring in politics and they're thinking, well, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? The business of politics is alive and well. After this program, if you switch on the television, you'll see many of the different networks, and you'll see that they're broadcasting the Supreme Court nomination. But when it's not that, it's some other political thing. The reason why they do that is that there's a lot of interest in politics. There was a famous book written in the 1990s called Why Americans Hate Politics. That book is wrong. Americans love politics. How do we know this? Well, television stations put this stuff on because people want to watch it and they can sell advertising. And if people didn't have an interest in it, it wouldn't be on television. So there's a lot of the business and politics and how that shapes our attitudes and what our feelings are as far as what's on television, who's watching those particular television stations. So the 2020 election, I don't know if you've noticed this, but it's been a very quiet election. There's been nothing going on. No one's civically engaged. We've met all the candidates.
It's
but
kind
of course,
boring, actually.
Yes, I'm being facetious, of course. We have seen the strangest election really since that presidential primary that ended here. Right in March, we go into this pandemic. And we've been polling, by the way, all through this pandemic and before. We have found that Americans are very civically engaged. Why is that? Well, obviously you want to know what the governors are saying, what the president is saying, what Dr. Fauci is saying about the pandemic. You also want to know, particularly if you own a small business or you're involved with nonprofits, hey, what's this CARES Act thing? You know, how am I going to get recuperated for the fact that I was laid off from my job because of the pandemic? Or is the state going to allow my children to go back to school? You know, all these different issues. All of a sudden, we're very, very tuned in to the civics at the time. And we're watching Governor Sununu in the afternoons, or maybe switching to Governor Cuomo, or maybe a White House press conference to see what is happening. So we have very high civic engagement. We have very unsettled situation in America right now with a lot of racial unrest, which has played into the politics of the time. And of course, on top of all of that, we have a Supreme Court nominee who is now speaking in front of the US Senate as I speak, trying to become confirmed. So we have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of civic engagement, and a lot of sort of unrest, and a deeply divided country. On top of that, we have, of course, the oldest 2 candidates ever to run for president or to be the nominees. And so we will have the oldest president on record in January. I study history. Remember 1980 when Reagan was running, it was a real problem because he was 68 years old. Now I think that was probably one of the younger candidates, if you take Pete Buttigieg out, of all the candidates that ran for president this time. So we're seeing older candidates. There's more sort of emphasis on who these vice presidents are, just in case there's some issue with that. We have Nancy Pelosi talking about the 25th Amendment and sort of looking at that situation. And that could be for either candidate, frankly, that wins this. And then we have some very, very strange debates. After the first presidential debate, the thing I was most struck by was the fact that I was watching ABC, and George Stephanopoulos, who worked for Clinton and has been at the ABC News helm for many years, said, I've been involved with politics for 40 years. I've worked on debates. I've been a part of them. I've never seen anything worse than what I just saw. I think that was pretty striking. He's a pretty frank guy. And so the first debate was very strange. The president gets COVID-19. Now we don't have a second debate. And now the third one is questionable. So we have some real tumultuous times. And to all this, as I mentioned, we've been polling here in New Hampshire. Just to get you some top lines that just came out, our polling period here, which is done via text message, which is interesting because people say, well, I don't have a landline anymore. How am I being reached? Well, the truth is that when normal times, we poll via landline and we poll via cell phone. It is legal to call you on your cell phone if you're doing political polling. Sorry to tell you that. And we do that from here. But now, because of COVID, we can't have students in a tight room making phone calls. So we've been doing text messages. Because of the Federal Communications Commission, we actually have to have somebody push a button about 30 times, 30,000 times. That sends a text message to, say, Neil Levesque. Neil Levesque opens up the text message to say, would you be willing to answer a few questions in this poll? And they do. We get higher rates of return. So we get actually almost double the amount of people that we put into a poll and get responses from those people. And we believe we've had some very, very accurate results because of this. We've been testing this since March. Some interesting things that have come out of our poll. So sometimes you get asked who are you going to vote for, and maybe your spouse, who's vehemently for one candidate, is in the background, and you say, I don't want to answer that necessarily so honestly. So, or maybe a candidate might be more fashionable because of what they said. So let me give you an example. Last year at this time period, we had the Billy Bush tapes with President Trump getting on the record with some pretty vile things that he said. And polling after that, maybe you sort of said, well, maybe I don't want to really answer that truthfully. And you were saying, well, maybe I'm not going to, I'm going to say I'm voting for Hillary rather than Trump, even though I'm voting for Trump. One way to get around that is you ask questions, who do you think is going to win the election? And psychologically, you normally will go towards the candidate that you're going to vote for in a situation like that. It's sort of a trick way to ask it. So straight up and down, if you ask New Hampshire voters on the 5, say, occasions that we have polled through the pandemic, who they're going to vote for, Joe Biden has an 8-point lead straight through, except in this last poll where he's widened that to 12 points. So he's gone up slightly. And the reason he's gone up is not because Donald Trump's numbers have gone down. It's because Biden's favorability has gone up. This is after that debate that was very controversial. And so partly that could be the reason why we see that after that debate, Biden's numbers went up. He was more favorable. So now he's at a 12-point lead in New Hampshire. But if you ask that question, who do you think is going to win the election? We've had a number of 41% to 41% straight on through the pandemic until now, where we're at 44% for Biden and 41% for Donald Trump. So Biden's gone up a little bit on that. Who do you think is going to win? So on those two tests, at this point in time, New Hampshire's 4 electoral votes, if the election were held today, would probably go for Joe Biden. Those 4 electoral votes in New Hampshire are very important. You'll all remember 2000, the Florida recount. If Al Gore had won New Hampshire's 4 electoral votes, there would never have been a Florida recount. No need for it. The state is considered sort of a purple state. Remember, we have a Republican governor, and our 4 members of our delegation are all Democrats. Speaking of that, here in New Hampshire, with so many people watching Governor Sununu, he has a 68% job approval rating, which is in the stratosphere, in my opinion, as a pollster. It's 68% is just very, very strong. But still, we see that on the ballot test, Sununu versus Feltus, Sununu's at 58% and Feltus is at 36%. Now you switch to the US Senate race where it's almost the reverse. Corky Messner gets 39% to Shaheen's 53%. So Shaheen has a commanding lead over her opponent. And the same really when you get to Custer and Negron, 52 to 38. Those are two very strong numbers, probably not surprising so much. Both those challengers in a COVID world where you can't give speeches to big groups, you can't go into people's living rooms, you can't go, to the fair and shake hands, you can't do all the normal things that you would be doing. It's a tougher thing. It's a tough time to be a challenger. The only race which is somewhat close is you have Pappas at 49 with Mowers at 41. Mowers has the same number as Donald Trump, 41. So he's at that Trump number, but Pappas is just a little bit lower than Biden. That's a tough 8 points, though, for him to make up. Two very young, energetic candidates in that race who had an interesting performance in their debate on New Hampshire Public Television, New Hampshire Public Radio, and we're looking forward to their debate performances here. A couple things about national polling. If you hear a poll go out and they say the Biden is winning in a national poll, this number versus this number, you can just about disregard it. Elections are won via the Electoral College. Those are the rules of the game, and campaigns are following those rules, and they're competing in those battleground states. And a lot of those battleground states are Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, Minnesota, just to name a few. And I think sort of the critical ones here are Michigan, Pennsylvania, but especially Florida. And if you look at those races, and if you look at those states, Biden has a consistent lead in all of them. He is, if you go by the polling, he has a consistent lead right now in these states. So again, I think there's 20 days left in this campaign. Lots of things can happen. There are going to be some pivot points. The first pivot point is that we could have a last debate, and I say we could. Hopefully we will have a final debate. Those final debates are critical. We've seen in history where candidates, there's low expectations for a candidate. A candidate can come in and overperform and really change the tide. I'll give you another 1980 example. Ronald Reagan was considered not smart, wasn't capable of doing the job. Jimmy Carter's people thought, let's debate him everywhere we can. Jimmy Carter is so much smarter than Ronald Reagan. Everybody's going to see that on the screen. And of course, once Ronald Reagan got up and did what he was very, very talented at doing, which was debating Jimmy Carter, things changed for Jimmy Carter, and Reagan, of course, won that election handily. So there are expectations on candidates. And of course, I think going into the final debate, we have the expectation, is Donald Trump going to sort of try to just dominate and interrupt and dominate and interrupt, or is Joe Biden going to be able to sort of counter that with some pretty good explanations of what he wants to do in the future? I don't know. I think it will be interesting to see whether or not the president and Biden sort of change their perspective on what they did last time and try to shift gears a little bit. The other thing is we could have 20 days left, but the president could announce that there's a vaccine. It could change people's outlook on the pandemic, which is the number one issue. Any number of things can happen. But what's happening now? I'm sure many of you know and probably have already voted in this election. We have a huge number of people voting absentee. The state of New Hampshire has allowed that in this case, the pandemic is a reasonable, you can still be basically here, but they're allowing you to vote absentee. We saw in the primary in September, the overall numbers, the 156,000 Democrats turned out in New Hampshire and 147,000 Republicans. So a little bit more Democrats voted in the primary. And we saw that 67,000 Democrats took absentee ballots to 24,000 Republicans. So if you, I got asked by a reporter just last week, hey, who do you think is more cognizant of wearing a mask, Republicans or Democrats? And I say, well, I think if you had to say who's trying to be more preventative and not going to the polls and trying to take an absentee ballot, the evidence is there that 3 times as many Democrats took an absentee ballot as Republicans. But just about even, 156 to 147, slight edge for the Democrats from that primary. That could mean that if those same numbers turned out in November, we could see a Biden victory here, presumably in New Hampshire. Another thing that our polling picked up is that 87% of Republicans support the president, and just about 100%, almost, I think in the high 90s, Democrats support Joe Biden. So Trump needs to get his people out to the polls, but he also needs to try to shore up and get more of the people in his own party to support him. After the election, what's going to happen? I don't know. Hopefully we'll have a smooth transition if there needs to be a transition. But either side, I hope that there is a peaceful situation and people sort of go back to sort of the, I don't want to say the old way, but the way where we're Americans first and we're, part of our tribe of Republican or Democrats second. Unfortunately, I don't see that necessarily happening. I hope it does. I think Americans are very divided. We're a very divided nation. We're having a program actually tomorrow called Not on Speaking Terms. And it's how, family members and good friends now, a lot of them are not on speaking terms because of politics, which is something that's really changed in about the last 20 years. I joke around that, you used to be able to, if you were a congressman, you used to be able to have a congressional town hall meeting in Milford or Exeter or Portsmouth and have people turn out who wanted to ask questions and say, what's your view on Social Security, say, for example. You can't even hold those meetings anymore because people will just go and scream at the member of Congress. And some of that is that, you may sit at church, for example, and pray with a member of your community that's perfectly nice and shake their hand, or non-COVID world, the equivalent of what we're doing now. But a lot of those same people believe that it's perfectly appropriate that in the public square that you should be able to just vent your anger on that elected official. Part of that is that we have news stations that are not providing necessarily information on both sides. They are providing affirmation. So if you are on the left, you may watch the television news that provides you affirmation that the beliefs that you have are the right ones. And they sow animosity and distrust of the other side. And they do this on purpose because, again, getting back to the professional side of politics, they're trying to get you to buy their books, sell their advertising, etc. And so they fan those flames. And so people are very divided on what news stations they watch, where they're getting their information, and a lot where this information is coming from. The other phenomena that we see, which fans those same flames, if you are on Facebook, you know what this is. You'll get a Facebook posting, can you believe this type of thing? And it's some outrageous claim. The best one is that members of Congress don't pay taxes, they don't pay into Social Security, they have special health care, they get a $1 million stipend after serving, 2 years in office, on and on and on. And all of that is untrue. And those emails and posts on Facebook that then we take and forward to our friends and it just perpetuates, a lot of those things are just designed to fan those same flames. There's a lot of disinformation out there. It's not good. It's not good for our democracy. And it's actually sort of terrible. I'll just give you an example. My daughter, who's 18, she's in college and she's very smart, but she uses TikTok and Instagram and all of those things. And she comes to me and she says, Justice Barrett, boy, she's a really terrible person. She's in some religious cult and where they don't believe this and they don't believe that. And she's, this and that. And I said, Molly, where did you hear all that? Justice Barrett is actually the same religion that you are. And she said, really? Well, that's not what they're saying on Instagram and TikTok and everything else. And it just goes to show how an educated, smart young woman who is reading the newspapers and engaged is getting sort of a lot of false information. And that's what goes on now. But before I take questions, I'll just say to you on the optimistic side that I spend a lot of time with elected officials and candidates. I told Kathleen and Kim when we were doing our pre-things of a lot of time that I have spent actually driving Donald Trump around New Hampshire, spent time with him in Trump Tower, some very interesting meetings. I've spent a lot of time with Joe Biden, with Hillary Clinton, you name the candidate, and with our members of our delegation on both sides of the aisle. And the truth is, and I know that this usually shocks people and I usually get dismissed and people, stop watching when I say this, but people who are elected or running for office on both sides of the aisle are very patriotic. They're trying to do what they believe is right for our country. They're trying to do the right thing. They're not trying to get rich off of this. They're not trying to be scandalous. They're trying to be good people. Now, are there a few bad apples? Sure, in any profession, there's a few bad apples and there's a few bad examples. But on the whole, people work very hard in this work. I'll give you an example that Congress is really, I think that there's probably no profession, if you want to call it a profession, in America that's lower rated in the polls than Congress. And yet, if you turn on C-SPAN on Thursday nights, you'll see people working very hard, doing some very boring things. I mean, dealing with the minutia of legislation on a Thursday evening at 8 p.m. is not exactly fun, but they're doing it because they love our country and they have an obligation and they want to do what's right by the people that they represent. And a lot of that doesn't come through. It's not heralded. If you want to make a lot of waves and be very successful these days in politics, you can be very sort of nasty on one side or the other and get all kinds of press. But if you want to do the diligent work that our country needs, you're just not going to get that kind of press. And that's because people are watching on both sides of those aisles, and those news organizations, again, that create that, fire those flames up, they're looking for those types of controversial people that they can put on television to exemplify either their pro or con on any particular issue. And it's a little bit sad because we as a country have a lot of big hurdles ahead of us, obviously one being the pandemic, and these challenges are going to need some seriousness as we get through them. So that being said, I'll take questions. I'll just start it off, but the question I always get, which is, how can you poll? Because in 2016, all the polling was Hillary Clinton was going to win. Hillary Clinton was going to win, and they were wrong. And so, how can you even think about doing polling? I always get that question. So I'm gonna use my brother-in-law, Bob, as an example. So Bob is a registered voter in a small town here in New Hampshire, but he never votes. He's registered, but he never votes. And so when pollsters in 2016, anytime when you look for people who are voting on a regular basis, you say, okay, that person's voting on a regular basis. They're going to give us a good test of the data. And so you call the person who's voting on a regular basis, but they don't call Bob because Bob rarely, if ever, votes. Maybe in the last 10 years, he hasn't voted. But Bob was really motivated by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump really sort of said, look, we're going to make America great again, and we're going to change things, and I'm not going to take any bull. And I hate to sort of condense his message down to that, but it was a good message because he found Bob. And Bob said, you know what? I don't usually vote, but I'm voting for Trump because that spoke to me directly. So Bob went out and voted, but the pollster missed him. So Trump was able to capitalize on a lot of people who were disaffected by politics with his message. And he was able to find those people and get them to the polls. And that overwhelmed the pollsters who were testing more traditional voters. So now you say, now it's 2020. What's different? Well, we know who Bob is, right? Because Bob voted in 2016. And we know now who Bob is. We know where he is and how to reach him. Yes, there are great databases on each and every one of you. When you go to Best Buy, like my wife does, and they say, would you like to be part of our membership club? All you have to do is give us your phone number and your email. That goes into a database, which then gets sold to people like me, and we actually know everything. So in most households in America, there are up to 600 different data points on each voter. So let's take me. They know where I live, how I vote, if I'm a registered Republican and all that. But that's not half of what they know. They know how many times I go out to eat, where I go out to eat, what magazines I get, what I respond to, what I buy at the grocery store. They know everything. That's all collected. And by the way, every time you go to a store and they say, can I have your phone number? Please tell them no. Because that goes right into that database. And right from that phone number, there's a big computer program and they figure it out. So they found Bob. Bob voted. But now we know who Bob is, and we're not going to miss him this time. So with that, I'll take some questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Neil. We have a lot of questions that are coming in, so I'm going to go through them and ask you the questions. We have a couple of questions on the Electoral College. Basically, our listeners are saying, do you think the Electoral College should be changed so the winner of the popular vote wins the elections? So people are asking, why is the Electoral College important right now?
I love this question. I get that all the time too. Many of you saw the musical Hamilton. It was actually Alexander Hamilton who started the Electoral College. It was his idea. They didn't put that in the movie or the play because, of course, these unpopular things they don't put in. So just a couple things on the Electoral College. Electoral College really was set up so that states were the United States. A lot of people forget that states, small states, would still have power in a unified United States. And that gives people in New Hampshire and our state, the Electoral College gives us voting power that we wouldn't have if it was just a popular vote. And so that's why it was set up. So being from New Hampshire and loving New Hampshire and wanting my vote to count as much as possible, I like the Electoral College, and I think that's no aversion as to, the last 2016 election and things like that and how things worked out. It's just, if you're from New Hampshire, I think that it shows why we need that. I mean, for the same reason, I wouldn't want US senators divvied up via population. We have 2 US senators. California has 2 US senators. I think that that's a good plan as well. But let's get to the practical side of things. To get us out of the Electoral College would mean a constitutional amendment. Okay, so a 2/3 vote. We can't even pass a budget at this point in the country. And as you are about to see, we're about to put someone on the Supreme Court with a vote of 51 votes. So the outlook to change the Electoral College is probably as good as me winning the Powerball at this point. I try every week, and it's nothing, it's a good discussion to have, and a lot of people want to have it, but the practicality of it is that it's probably very unlikely that there'll be any type of change with the Electoral College.
Great answer, and very practical. But it probably won't happen. We're getting more questions. One that I think is on a lot of people's minds and a lot of pollsters' minds: what percentage of people have really not made up their minds on whom to vote for, given the fact that much of the country has already voted, or some of it has already voted?
Another great question. So when you're polling, you find that there's these big pockets of people who say, I'm undecided. Now, we've had a very divisive election here. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Everyone knows who Joe Biden is. People are engaged, yet we still have people who are undecided. I'm sure that they probably are. But when you're in the business of politics, a lot of the times you say to yourself, those people are probably undecided and they're going to remain that way and they're not going to vote. It's almost another way to say that they're just disengaged and they're not going to vote. Now that there is some, and we've seen this in those New Hampshire numbers. Remember how I said that Biden went up in his favorability amongst those few people who were undecided. So there is a small amount, and they're very critical right now. So if a campaign can find who those people are and get them convinced to vote for a candidate or one or the other and get them to the polls, that's very important. So that's why you're going to get contacted, probably via phone, text, many different reasons. If you answer necessarily a poll that's conducted by one of the campaigns and they say, are you considering voting for Donald Trump? You're now in their database and you're going to get contacted as we get closer to the polls, or you may get a thing in the mail saying, here's your thing to request an absentee ballot. How many? It's the sort of big question in politics. How many people are really undecided and how many of those people really are not probably going to go to the polls in general?
So do you have, to answer the question specifically, do you have an idea of what percentage of the country right now, according to pollsters, is undecided?
Yeah, I think that there are probably between 2 and 4% that are undecided that'll actually go to the polls. And the people who, so you, in this number here, you have 41% in New Hampshire for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I like to say, is like Lake Winnipesaukee frozen over. Donald Trump's numbers are the same as they are in Meredith, as they are in Paugus Bay. It's the same height. He doesn't move. All through the pandemic, despite all of the controversies, all of the things, if you're for Donald Trump, you're for him, and that doesn't change. And that's sort of your base number. And so if Biden's at 53, and even if you took that the base number was a little bit higher for Democrats in New Hampshire, there's still some flexibility there. Let's say 8 or 10 points of people that could, if there was something that happened. So one of the candidates gets on the debate stage and passes out, for example, and can't complete a sentence, or some terrible thing happens, you could see about an 8% to 10% swing right there. But they're really not undecided at this point, according to the questions that we asked them.
So that's interesting. So it's been 41% for Trump all the way through. I have a related question from one of our listeners who wants to know, in New Hampshire, are senior citizens skewing more Democrat or Republican?
That is an interesting issue. I don't know if I have the answer to that question off the top of my head. In the primaries, seniors actually were more interested in voting for Pete Buttigieg than Joe Biden, which was the two extremes on the age group. That was a very interesting phenomenon. The other thing about seniors is that they go to the polls. There's always, this time of the year, you'll always hear how college students are going to vote in record numbers. Young people are going to vote in record numbers. They really don't. For somebody who's in the college world, I would love to see that happen, but they really don't. It's seniors and middle-aged people that really are the meat and potatoes in an election. A candidate that I know went to a boarding school, high school in New Hampshire the other day and spoke, and one of the students came to me and said, I thought it was great, that they went there. And I said, well, normally that's not their target audience, because that is a very small group of people that potentially could vote. Going to Riverwoods and speaking in a normal year when we didn't have a pandemic, if you were a campaign manager, that would be a gold mine.
Right.
Because you want to be speaking to people who are very civically engaged and very, very much know about the obligation and the duty really to vote and take it very seriously. So we see those senior numbers. It's interesting. The senior numbers, obviously, in Florida has a very strong demographic. Trump has done very well in the past in Florida, but he is slightly behind right now in Florida. If you want to watch election night returns and you want to see who wins, but you want to go to sleep early, as soon as Florida comes in, you can pretty much take it to the bank, in my opinion, as to who's going to win this election. How's that?
Okay, that's a good tip. More questions. One interesting question, which is, do you feel that if we didn't have a party system, the U.S. would be less divided, and that then voters would be more focused on the candidate and not a party?
Another great question. So people say, well, maybe we should have a third party, maybe we should do without parties. But really what parties are is it's a group of people who get together, all different walks of life, all different interests, and they get together and say, if we get together, we can win. The only reason that parties exist really is to win. And that kind of, on a simple level, if you go to a party convention, you'll see that, because there's a lot of people in the room who can't stand each other. and whether it's issues or personality or what have you, there's all kinds of infighting going on. But what happens is that enough of them get together to win. Now, if a party fails to win over and over again, that party really needs to adapt. I mean, we've seen this for years, where the Republican Party of 1960, for example, and the Democratic Party of 1960 is a very different party than it is today. They've reached out to different groups. Union memberships were always part of the Democratic makeup. Those memberships have gone down. They've brought in people in different groups. So I would say that it's almost impossible to get rid of this two-party system. We could just name it two tribes. And it's really become a two-tribe system. To some degree, it was exemplified by the Republican Party this year with their convention. They did away with their party platform, which really was, this is what we believe in. Now, a member of the Republican Party, let's say I was a congressman from New Hampshire, I don't necessarily have to always vote directly with that party platform, but you sort of have it as a base of, this is what we stand for. That's no longer the case. It's whatever the president is stand for, he's sort of the head of the tribe, we will go along with. And things all fall in those categories. You just don't see people crossing through too much to the other side. And again, that's because people get into that tribe, they watch the information put out by that tribe, maybe the news station that's put out by that tribe, and they stick with those tribes. Third parties really, really don't tend to exist. I was telling Kathleen that I studied the 1964 and 1968 election. If you remember, Lyndon Johnson won in 64. He cleaned up. And, at that point it was, do we have a one-party nation? That was the question. The Republican Party was, can we keep the lights on in the party headquarters? We don't have the money to pay the light bill. It's the end of the party, the Republican Party as we know it. And of course, 4 years later, there was Richard Nixon winning the presidency. So what happens? People win, and then other people regroup and say, okay, we need to bring in more people so that we can win. And that's traditionally what happens.
Makes a lot of sense. Another question. Much of your ending statements give weight to what President Trump has said from day one, fake news. Can you comment on this?
Well, whenever he doesn't like something, he calls it fake news. So he overloads on that, if you will. But a lot of the times what he's done is he has found enough things that is fake or biased news, and he can hold it up and say, see, it's fake. They're not giving me a chance. A lot of traditional Republicans will say, who have been elected officials, for example, that I know have said, look, I don't agree with Donald Trump on a lot of things, but we had to deal with biased news media for years and years and years. And now he holds them to account, and they're not able to put Republicans into a box like they used to be able to. I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot. And a lot of people will say, hey, when we had, growing up, we had 4, 5, and 7, the 3 news stations. I guess it would be ABC, CBS, and NBC. And they were fine, and they gave us news. But, a lot of Republicans would say that, Walter Cronkite was a great reporter and stuff like that, but he was not exactly in the middle on a lot of things. And they felt that way, and they didn't feel like they got a fair shake. Hey, the evidence is in. The evidence is that Rupert Murdoch figured out that there were a lot of people in America that were disgruntled by those news stations and said, hey, let's create Fox News, and we can create a sort of thing that is more angled towards the right. And MSNBC figured out on the left. And so, there was a vacuum, and the energy went to the vacuum. So, as far as fake news go, I see it a lot of the times where we'll have an event here at the Institute of Politics where Mike Pence, for example, will give a speech, and he'll say these things, and this is how he said it. And then you watch it that night on the evening news, and it's the interpretation of that reporter who's trying to sell something. They want you to tune in. And it's much more dramatic than it ever has been. I'll pick on my favorite, which is ABC. David Muir, great news guy, great anchor. But you turn on David Muir and your blood pressure will go up because he says, tonight, more than ever, he goes right into it. Massive floods in the Midwest, terrible things, trouble with voting, terrible, stay tuned. And you're like, oh my God, should I eat my dinner or, should I turn up the volume? And you turn up the volume, and that's designed to draw you in. And they know that. And so they're not necessarily going to be talking about the minutia that happened today with Judge Barrett. They're going to talk about, what did she say when she said this? And can it inflame people? And it's the way but people, the voters, want that, and they see that, and they're drawn to it. A related question is, there's so much money in politics. I get this all the time. Oh, they complain that there's so much money in politics, and members of Congress have to spend so much of their time raising money. All true. Say, isn't that terrible? We should limit money. And I said, well, the reason why they raise money is because they need that money for 30-second television ads. And 30-second television ads work, okay? People across America wouldn't buy a car based on a 30-second television ad, but they'll go and vote for a candidate or against a candidate in many cases based upon that a 30-second television ad. And it's sad because people are not digging in and saying, I have a civic responsibility. What's the real facts here? They're going by that 30-second television ad. So who's really to blame? And I always tell the truth in this job and try to be even-handed on my criticism of both parties and both sides. But in this case, the problem is the people. And if people weren't so influenced by 30-second television ads, and they said, hey, wait a second, I'm not going to buy that Ford versus the Toyota based on, them saying it's the greatest car in the world. I shouldn't do that with my candidates either.
That is great. And we've just got a comment from one of our listeners about how David Muir's reporting raised her blood pressure, and she walked away from that. We have not a whole lot of time. I'm going to take one more last question, which just came in. How do you interpret the efforts of the Lincoln Project? And then I think that will be it for questions. We'll wrap up after that.
Well, thank you. I know a lot of the people who were involved with the Lincoln effort, the Lincoln Project. And
perhaps you can just explain that for everyone.
Sure. There's a group of Republicans who are really devoted towards defeating Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not your traditional Republican by any means. And there's a lot of people in the Republican Party who have become deeply offended by that and have gone to say, that morality or standing up for what's right is more important than my party. If you read today's newspaper, you'll see that Tom Rath, who is a prominent Republican and very notable person in New Hampshire, has endorsed Joe Biden and basically says why he's doing that. The former chair of the Republican Party in New Hampshire, same thing, Jennifer Horn, she's part of the Lincoln Project. Some of the things that are interesting is they've put money against Susan Collins' Senate race in Maine because they've said that she's followed Trump too closely. And she's probably the member, most notably in the US Senate, who hasn't fallen Trump lockstep. She has sort of been this person who has been out front and sort of in her criticism, her and maybe Mitt Romney. So they've kind of gone outside that thing. I think that there's always a transformation in party politics when you have a candidate that sort of is going a little bit more and reaching into new groups of voters. Remember, that party thing is you're trying to get to 51. Trump's reached outside of that, trying to get some voters over here, but he's lost this segment of Republicans. And that's what the project is all about. I don't know if it'll be successful, and I don't know if Trump loses what the future of the party looks like. And who will take sort of the mantle going forward. But it'll be very interesting because he is such a popular in the fact that people know who he is. And he has really commanded the Republican Party, which is really the Trump party at this point. Thank you for that great question. And thank you all. It's been great.
Neil, I really appreciate you being with us today. I think we learned a lot from you. This is on everyone's mind, and I feel like we've answered a lot of questions and we've been able to walk away a little more informed in the process. I want to encourage everyone that is on this session to please go out and vote, whatever you prefer, absentee or in person, but this is such an important election. Don't forget to do that. And if you want to get a little happier, please join us for our next workshop. We have a friend of mine, John Leland, who's a New York Times reporter who wrote a book called Happiness is a Choice You Make by following a handful of 85-year-olds in New York City. And he has some updated thoughts based on experiences for the pandemic. So this promises to be a really good session that will help you endure through the next few months we have coming up. That's our Zoom for today. Thank you so much for being present and staying engaged in your questions. Thank you so much, Neil, for all of your information. It's always a delight to see you. I know you've got a super busy time right now, and I thank you for all of the focus and work you did preparing for today. If anyone is interested in Riverwoods, Exeter, Birch Hill, or Durham, please contact us at the following numbers. And thank you again. Have a wonderful day and stay safe. Bye, Neil.
Bye.
Thank you all.